Good evening, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, living life, loving life, enjoying life. Wanted to talk to people tonight about the IRS. And in particular, a couple points about it. And if you look at the heading on the post, you'll see I placed the construction of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code itself, which is listed at 26 USC 7708, I think it is. But it's listed up in the post. And you would think that a code that has 75,000 pages would have a little bit more to its construction than just what's in this post. But when we look at the post and we read that, the wording above, read it specifically and understand exactly what it's saying. Because what it's saying is that, in effect, it has no legal effect. Period. Anywhere. The only place it has any legal effect is within the IRS code itself. And if you think about this, when it comes down to the IRS code, what it does is it taxes the transfer of its property. It records every transfer that's recorded in regards to Federal Reserve notes, which are owned diametrically by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And the IRS is one of the watchdogs for the IMF as the taxing agent for the United States Corporation for their use of the Federal Reserve notes, specifically designed as a fiat currency. That fiat currency is what people charge for the transfer of goods, services, things like that. And when we think about a transfer, anytime you transfer something, you're transporting it from one place to another. You're taking it from one port of jurisdiction and giving it to another port of jurisdiction. You are transporting it. It is called transportation. Now, why would I all of a sudden be talking about transportation when I'm concerned about the IRS? Well, again, when you look at the wording on the construction of the IRS code here, it speaks in reference to in section A there. It speaks in reference to citing other codes, statutes, rules, regulations, laws, and such. And one of the places that we see that is in section 26 of the United States Code, again, the IRS Code, section 7701, subsection H. It talks about the motor vehicle lease. And that's why we talk about transportation. The IRS has its hands in transportation through a motor vehicle lease because it's trying to keep track of all the transfer of Federal Reserve notes. Now, again, I urge people to read this section, 26 USC 7701, subsection H. And you'll see within that subsection, it's got different parts with different subsections within those parts. It's not a real long read, and I suggest you read it and understand what they're doing through the motor vehicle registration and then giving a certificate of title because you've registered a motor vehicle. And what you've done there is you've created a trust contract, a quasi-contract with the state and the IRS to perform commerce on the public roadways using your own private automobile as the owner and the state as the lessor You're the lessee, and under that contract, you're required by state statutes to pay fines, fees, penalties, taxes, and revenues. And that's why the IRS enforces so much, because it reaches right into the arm of transportation. Now, despite the fact that several of us know that that's not possible because of the wording and the way things work, there are a substantially large number of people out there that are caught up in the cognitive dissonance, indoctrination, the propaganda, misleading, false news, whatever, fake news, whatever you want to call it, all the distractions and divisional tactics that do not understand this simple concept. Read this section of the United States Code, Title 26 USC. I believe that's 7708. It's in the post. Read that, research it, look it up, whatever search engine you want to pull up, and it's going to pull up the exact same thing. And that's as much as there is. That's the construction of the United States Code, IRS Code, Title 26. That's the construction. And another thing I want to point out is, you notice it's at the in a very late stage of the code. Most of your other codes, laws, rules, regulations have that kind of stipulation in regards to its authority and its construction in the very beginning. United States, or the Uniform Commercial Code, talks about its construction in section 1.101. Telling you it's right at the beginning. Same with a lot of your state statutes. They'll start out with the construction of the statutes right at the beginning, at the very beginning of the statutes. However, here in the IRS code, we see that it's buried deep within, and it's a very small section, and basically tells you it has no legal effect whatsoever. Read the wording on that Title 26 section, and read that it stipulates that it has no legal effect. Period. The only place it has legal effect is within the IRC itself, within Title 26. It has no effect with your state statute. It has no effect with any other code of the United States. It has no effect with Uniform Commercial Code. It has no legal effect with anything but its own code. So when people look at the enactment of this Title 26, that's what the special enactment form is. It's enacted singly and solely for itself, and it very distinctly is a service provided by the IMF for the Federal Reserve banking institution to keep track of its Federal Reserve notes through its use upon the United States corporation and the private sector. And I'll go into a little detail here about how that works. A lot of people think, well, isn't the Federal Reserve note specifically for use by public officials? Isn't it specifically for public use? And I'll tell you what happened is, back in the 30s when they instituted the Federal Reserve note, they instituted a few other programs about the same time, such as Social Security and the New Deal. And what happened is, the good old man that instituted that New Deal did so under the guise of a guy named Edward Mandell House, and it was just part of the indoctrination of the system, where they removed all the gold. People made a run on the banks, and they ended up switching the currency, the monetary system, to this fiat currency system that we have now. But it was only supposed to be meant for the public, and the private sector was supposed to continue on with their trade and barter, creating, educating themselves and creating their own private trust so they could issue their own certificates of trust, certificates of indebtedness, bills of exchange, promissory notes amongst themselves. Those are all very viable options. But what happened was, during the New Deal, the government put in a very large workforce to help reemploy people that had been suffering so long, that they created this New Deal and put all these people to work, and they had to have a way to compensate them. So they said, well, we'll just let you use ours. We just let you use ours. It was part of the indoctrination into believing that you're a public citizen, that you're a public official. The Social Security account, when you sign up for a Social Security account, that card is only meant to be given to a public official. You have to have some kind of corporate office or public office within the public community. In other words, you have to have a corporate seat in an office of a public service agency, a benefit agency that provides services to the general public. And if you're not in something like that, then you shouldn't have the Social Security card. If you're not a teacher, if you're not a doctor in a hospital, a public hospital, if you're not working in some kind of public facility or in the military or have some kind of seat in public office, you don't own a Social Security card. You don't own a Social Security account, and you shouldn't be messing with them. Those aren't yours. They're specifically meant for certain people, and those certain people have to take oaths of office or be assigned or appointed officially. And then once they take that office, they still have to take that oath, thereby giving up their citizenship. So understand this stuff and realize that it all ties into the transportation system. It all ties into the tax system. And it's all about transferring. And who's responsible for the transfer and what they're actually transferring. Is it your property? Is it somebody else's property? Is it public property? Is it private property? We have to get down to these words and understand what they mean. And when you look at this Title 26, the construction of Title 26, the IRS code, you'll see it has no legal effect. Period. If you don't understand that, read it and read it again. Read it again and read it again. I don't care if you read it 100 times. I don't care if you read it 1,000 times. Get to the point where you finally understand and comprehend through cognitive results of learning the information and educating yourself to understand that it has no legal effect. So when it comes down to this motor vehicle lease, when you look at that Title 26, 7701, subsection H, you'll see in there Section 2C, I think, talks about the terms and conditions of the lease, where you're using it 50% of the time for commercial purposes. Now, I don't know too many people that are on the road and spend 50% of their time using their own private automobile for commercial purposes. 50% of the time they're on the road. There are many drivers, delivery drivers that I know of that work for pizza joints and things like that, that even though they put in 40 hours a week, they still spend 90 hours a week on the road traveling around doing this and that, looking for odd jobs and stuff, and don't use their automobile for private use that other time. Therefore, that motor vehicle lease is false. And if you look under Section 2D, you'll see it says right there, lessor, which is the state, must have no knowledge that certification is false. Okay, so here's the solution. Your traffic violations. You tell them that the certification is false. Under Title 26 of the United States Code, Section 7701, subsection H, Part 2, subsection D. And what you're going to do is point out that it says here that there's an agreement through registration whereupon I receive a certificate of title, and that certificate of title is for a motor vehicle, saying that I am now using this automobile as a motor vehicle for commercial purposes on the public roadways, and I am doing so at least 50% of the time that I use it. Now, I obviously do not use it 50% of the time for commercial purposes, therefore it is false. Therefore, there is no longer a requirement to title and register that motor vehicle, because it no longer falls under the descriptive use of commercial purposes, but rather under UCC 9-109, which holds greater authority than the IRS code, as a personal household good, primarily used as a personal household good, primarily used for family conveyance. The motor vehicle lease is false. In most of your states, your motor vehicle codes will sit there and they'll start out in a certain section, and they'll have within their motor vehicle code a requirement for owner to register, and it'll be listed under taxes. So again, if the IRS code itself is saying that it has no legal effect on any other code, statutes, rules, regulations, acts, edicts, ordinance, whatever, it has no legal effect. Period. What's that mean? It means that other code has superiority. Well, if the state statute is based on taxes, then that state statute has no authority either. See what I'm saying? It has to be based upon a higher authority. It can't be based on a lower authority and then assert that lower authority as a taxing event. And that's what they're doing. It's exactly what they're doing. They're charging it as a taxing event using a state statute that's relying upon a U.S. code that says itself that it has no legal effect anywhere else. So they're again in a catch-22. Start using your heads, people, and think about this stuff, and we can easily defeat these requirement for certificate of title, requirement to have it registered. Okay, officer, if you can show me where I'm performing commerce on the public roadways according to your own statutes, rules, and regulations, as well as the United States Code, which you have to abide by because it's got that superiority thing in it. We look at Title 26 and where the motor vehicle lease is established, and it says it has no legal effect. Why would that be? Because it has no legal effect. All you have to do is let them know it's false. The only people that drive commercially are those that drive somebody else's vehicle because somebody else owns them and they have the surety on them. That way a person is the surety and not the man that's driving. The man that's driving should never be liable unless he himself makes a mistake, and that of course is the reason for the driver's license. They have to identify that other party that might be liable. Well, that's what they're doing. They're holding that liability over him and bringing him into court on inter-associate regulations, inter-commercial regulations, inter-taxing regulations. He's part of that system. He signed up for a license. He's part of that system. He hasn't reneged that it's false. And if he's driving a semi-rig, he can't. He's spending most of his time on the road as a commercial driver, then that is a true lease. So it's got some kind of collateral rental agreement with it. But if you're using your own private automobile and signing up for a driver's license, registration, and certificate of title, all you have to do is let them know that the motor vehicle lease is false. Pointing out Title 26 of the United States Code, Section 7701, subsection H, and that's a lower h in parentheses, subsection or subpart 2 in parentheses, subsection D. Lessor must not have knowledge that lease is false. Once you let them know that the lease is false, then the lease no longer carries any weight whatsoever. You've given them notice. They now know that the lease is false. and they have no proof otherwise. If you've got a 1973 VW Bug established on the record as the automobile that's been certified and registered to perform commerce on the public roadways, that's a capital D, Pa. Capital D. Lowercase h, 2, capital D. But if you're operating a 73 VW Bug and they're trying to convince you that it's a motor vehicle by their standards, then you turn around and pull out the description of an actual motor vehicle used for commercial purposes, and they go by weight classes, and they're ruined there too. So not only is the lease false, but they have no proof whatsoever that it even classifies as a motor vehicle for commercial use. See, these automobile industries, they produce both automobiles and motor vehicles. An automobile is something that is intended to be used primarily for private family conveyance. A motor vehicle is something that is produced with specific intent to be used as for a commercial purpose upon the public roadways. This is your utility trucks, your water trucks, your garbage trucks, all these semis, anything that carries and transports food and consumer goods, airplanes, boats. Those are all things that transfer and transport goods and provide services, whether it be transporting goods or taxi, buses. Buses and taxis are two different classifications, yet automobile manufacturers make both of them. They make both taxis, which is actually produced and defined by its style and its classification as as an automobile, but because of its description of use, of its intended use, and its design by direct automobile custom request to put yellow taxi markings on it, then they're producing a motor vehicle. But a bus is always a motor vehicle. They can't say that that's an automobile that was intended for the use of a motor vehicle, or a motor vehicle that was intended for the use of an automobile. You can't do that. So, and that's why the UCC 9-109 is so important in regards to this situation too. You have to remember everything that they're doing is discerned between public and private. The IRS code only applies to employees and employers. Look up the term employee in there, and you'll find out it's only a government official. You can only be paying taxes if you, or you're only required to pay taxes if you work for the government. If you're actually in some kind of official seat, if you've been appointed, assigned, taken an oath, joined the military, something like that. If you're a teacher working for the public education system, a doctor, nurse, a janitor working for a public hospital, you're working for the public. You're a public official. You're closely related to taking care of responsibilities that the private individuals have given up, and therefore they're going to lay their responsibility on you. That's what you're getting taxed for, that position. So think about this stuff, folks, and realize that the Title 26 does have a lot to do with transportation itself. UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, Section 9-109. Read that entire section. It talks a lot about the use of goods. But again, like I said, the automobile industry produces automobiles and motor vehicles both. The automobile dealership sells both automobiles and motor vehicles. Automobile repair mechanics repair both automobiles and motor vehicles. An automobile can be both an automobile and a motor vehicle. Something that's described as a motor vehicle cannot be anything less than a motor vehicle. However, it can still be used for other purposes. But because of its definition, it will always be a motor vehicle by class. And again, like I said, that's your garbage trucks, your utility trucks, your water trucks, your semis, your panel trucks used for transporting goods, things like that, buses. So Think about this and again realize it has no legal effect. All you have to do is use your intelligence to stand up for it and use the words against them. Understand how it's all put together, how it's all a contract. It's just a contract between the state and the federal government. Again, like I said, what they're doing here is they're trying to acquire funds. They're trying to reacquire the funds that they let out into the private sector. Okay? Those funds are international monetary funds. They belong to the International Monetary Fund. And they're trying to collect those. And so what happens is that's called an acquisition. They're trying to acquire them funds. And under the title, under Federal Acquisitions Regulations, Part 52.212-5, and this is why I say it's a contract. It states clearly, contract terms and conditions required to implement statutes of executive order commercial item. And in that context, you'll see it says it has a hyphen between executive order and commercial item. That hyphen means that executive order is with commercial item. It means that executive order is a commercial item. It's what tells us that Congress is a commercial entity. It behaves both as a federal government in its executive authority as well as a commercial entity in its judicial authority. So understand this stuff and realize that when it says contract terms and conditions required to implement statutes of executive order commercial item, that's the contract between the federal government and the state to guideline their statutes in line with federal government so that they can acquire as much as possible by working together. So again, that Title 26 of the Federal Code, the United States Code, has no legal effect on any other part of the United States Code or any state statute. It has no legal effect on the Uniform Commercial Code. It has no legal effect on Uniform Trust Law. It has no legal effect. And having 75,000 pages, being one of the largest section in the United States Code, tells us that's where we need to start looking for our remedies. That's where all of our leases and everything are going to be disclosed. Surprised I found that motor vehicle lease, but that's exactly what it is. They're telling you that by registering your motor vehicle, they're going to give you a certificate of title. That certificate of title is not a title of a motor vehicle. It's a title that you hold as a public official to perform commerce on the public roadways for the state of Iowa, who is the lessor and is not claiming any interest in ownership. They're going to leave that on your shoulders. That's where liability lays, is the owner. And that's why when we develop our private trust, and we start putting our property into private trust under ownership of the person rather than ourselves, they can no longer hold us liable. And that's how it all ties together. Get that private trust set up and learn how the IRS code is affecting everything. Your parking tickets, everything, speeding tickets, traffic violations of any sort, transportation code, Iowa Department of Transportation, United States Department of Transportation, Department of Motor Vehicles. They're all in quasi-contract with each other to make that scheme work. And all you got to do is let them know it's false. It's as simple as it gets. If it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this. God bless you. Have a great night.